Hello and welcome to this week's Patriots Mailbag. I am Doug Kyed. If you have a question for me, tweet it to me at Doug Kyed using the hashtag MailDoug, and maybe I'll answer it here or my weekly written mailbag on Nesson.com. First question here comes from Jose, who asks, although the main issue is the wide receiver depth, very thin, I think another concern might be linebacker. Do you think they would be the weak spot on defense? And yeah, that probably is the weakest part of the Patriots defense there at linebacker after they lost Kyle Van Noy, Dante Hightower, Jamie Collins, Elandon Roberts. It would be difficult to fill in all of that depth that they had last season. They have Juwan Bentley, and they've got the rookies Josh Uche and Anthony Jennings. They've got some bodies there at outside linebacker like John Simon, Shalik Calhoun, and Chase Winovich. So between some of those names I mentioned, Bentley and Uche and Jennings and Winovich, I just think that there's more upside at linebacker than there is at wide receiver, where you've got Julian Edelman, really the only sure thing on the roster. Behind him, obviously, N'Keal Harry, first-round pick. High ceiling there, but beyond that, Damiere Byrd, Jacoby Myers, Gunnar Olszewski, Devin Ross. Jeff Thomas is an appealing player, but he's an undrafted free agent, no guarantee to make the roster. So I think there's better depth at linebacker if you include Brandon Copeland in there and some of those other guys as well. And with Uche and Jennings and Winovich, there's probably a little bit more upside at that position as well. Second question here comes from Jake, I think. Do you think the Patriots should have held on to Sanu, in your opinion? I don't know. That's tough to say. I probably would have held on to him simply because he's another veteran option at the position. But as far as value goes, I can't blame them for cutting him since he was going to be $6.5 million. That's a lot more than a lot of the other wide receivers on the Patriots roster. And Sanu really wasn't standing out any more than those other guys that I mentioned, like Jacoby Myers and Damiere Byrd and Gunnar Olszewski. So if you can get a similar player for much less money, yeah, I certainly can't blame them for cutting Sanu, but I think there has to be a plan there, because from what we saw out at training camp practices, with that wide receiver core, it's a rough looking group. So, maybe there's a plan to add a veteran or trade for a veteran or pick someone up off waivers, but as it stands, that's one of the weakest wide receiver groups in the entire NFL. Final question here comes from Adam, who asks, biggest disappointment in training camp so far besides Mohamed Sanu? And I would go with Jarrett Stidham on this one. I expected Stidham to, make it a competition with Cam Newton in training camp, and that never happened. He looked pretty good to start, but he was throwing too many interceptions. Then he had the injury, so then he was limited out in practice, and right now he's sort of neck and neck with Brian Hoyer for that backup job. So, as far back as June, we were talking about Jarrett Stidham being the Patriots' starting quarterback this season. Then they sign Cam Newton, and obviously Cam Newton becomes the favorite there. And now suddenly, maybe Stidham's not even the backup. He's competing for that role with Brian Hoyer. So that would be a major step back from last season, even when Stidham beat out Brian Hoyer and was Tom Brady's backup. So I don't know, maybe Jarrett Stidham still winds up going on to have a good NFL career. Maybe he's still the Patriots' future starter if Cam Newton leaves after one season. But as of now, Stidham has to be a pretty big disappointment in Patriots training camp.